Nobody warned Marcus Ellington that the most dangerous night of his life would begin with a child whispering beside his elbow. "Someone is trying to hurt you." 4 words. Soft as breath. Precise as a blade. He had survived hostile takeovers that ran for months. He had sat across boardroom tables from men who smiled at him while secretly moving to dismantle everything he had built. He had heard his name used as a threat, a strategy, a bargaining chip. None of it, not one moment in 20 years of building power from the ground up, had hit him the way 4 words from a child did at his own engagement party. The ballroom of the Ellington Grand Hotel was extraordinary. Crystal chandeliers suspended overhead like constellations, pouring warm gold light down across polished marble floors. Witte roses climbed tall silver arrangements on every table. A string quartet played near the stage, smooth and unhurried. Hundreds of guests in designer gowns and tailored suits moved through the light, laughing, raising glasses, celebrating the future Marcus had spent 2 years carefully building. Everything was exactly right. Every detail had been controlled. Every face in that room was someone he had chosen to let close. And somewhere in the middle of all that golden glass, a little girl in a simple blue dress was staring at the champagne flute in his hand like it was a weapon she recognized. Her name was Nia Brooks. 8 years old. Deep brown eyes that held steady in a way most adults never managed. Neat braids tied with silver ribbons, and on her wrist, a small silver bracelet that caught the chandelier light whenever she moved. Her grandmother ran an after-school program at the community center his foundation funded downtown. Nia had no reason to matter tonight. No reason to be the pivot point of this entire evening. And yet she stood there, unmoving. She looked at the glass. Then at him. She did not flinch. She did not look away. "Someone is trying to hurt you," she said again. Softer the second time. Like a secret that had been pressing against the inside of a locked room and had finally found a crack. Marcus crouched slowly, lowering himself until their eyes were level. Around them, guests continued laughing. Music filled the room. No one turned. No one noticed. The celebration moved forward, the way celebrations do, indifferent to anything happening at its edges. He had spent his life reading people. He knew what desperation looked like. He knew the difference between a child performing distress and a child genuinely carrying it. Her voice had not trembled. Her eyes were not wide with drama. She looked like someone who had already counted the cost of staying silent and decided silence was too expensive. "What did you see, Nia?" he asked quietly. She swallowed. Her fingers closed tighter around the silver bracelet. "I saw someone switch your glass." The words moved through him like cold water. Before she could say anything else, applause erupted near the stage. The quartet had finished a piece, and the sound rolled through the ballroom like a wave. Nia flinched. Used slightly. Used enough. Children seeking attention do not flinch at applause. Children carrying real fear do. Marcus noted it and said nothing. Then Victoria appeared. Victoria has moved through crowds the way water finds its level. Effortless. Perfectly placed. Her white designer gown caught the light from every angle. Her blonde hair was flawless. Her smile, as always, was the kind that made entire rooms feel chosen. She slipped her arm through Marcus's and leaned in close. "There you are. Everyone is waiting for the toast." "I know," Marcus said. His gaze drifted back toward Nia for just a second. Victoria followed his look toward the girl. "She's adorable," she said warmly. "One of the scholarship families?" "Her grandmother helps run the community center," Marcus replied. Victoria smiled. "That explains the manners." She turned back to him. "Are you ready?" Marcus looked at the champagne glass in his hand. The bubbles moved slowly upward, quiet and indifferent. He held it for a beat longer than he should have. Then he placed it on a passing server's tray. Something moved across Victoria's face. Brief. Nearly invisible. Gone before he could give it a name. "I need water," he said. Long night. Victoria laughed softly. You've been working too hard. She squeezed his arm and moved ahead toward the stage, already redirecting her attention to the guests she passed. Marcus stood still for a moment. He exhaled slowly. Then he looked back at Nia, who had not moved, who was still watching him with those steady brown eyes, as if she was deciding what kind of man he was. Tell me the rest, he said. She leaned in close. Before you came in, I was getting lemonade near the service table. She glanced toward the drink station. I heard two voices from the hallway behind the wall. A man and a woman. The woman sounded like she was in control. Like it was already decided. The man sounded like he didn't want to be there. She paused, gathering the memory carefully. The woman said it had to happen before the wedding. She said no one would notice. Because everyone trusted her. Marcus went still. The noise of the ballroom seemed to pull back, as though the room had taken a step away from him. And the glass? He asked. The one on the tray right now is not the same one that was there before. I watched someone swap it while you were talking to her. I watched them set a different glass in the same spot. Marcus looked at the tray. He looked at the glass the server had just returned to position. He looked at the small, empty space where a different glass had once sat. He did not make a scene. He walked calmly toward Daniel Ross, his executive assistant of 15 years, who stood near the entrance reviewing the evening schedule on a tablet. Find out who prepared the drinks tonight, Marcus said quietly. Every name with access to the staging room. Every entry on the access log. Do it without drawing attention. Daniel blinked. But 15 years had taught him when to ask questions and when to move. Of course, he said. Marcus walked away. He did not pick up another glass for the rest of the evening. Daniel found him 12 minutes later in a side corridor just beyond the ballroom, away from the music, away from the laughter, in the low hum of ventilation and the distant sound of the hotel kitchen. He was holding a tablet. His face was already tense. Every drink tonight was prepared in a secured staging area. He began. Only 6 people had authorized access. The head bartender. 2 servers. The catering supervisor. A post. Myself. And Victoria. Marcus said nothing. He waited. My name is there because I approved the seating chart in that same room earlier today, Daniel continued. But there's something else. He swiped to the next screen. One glass went missing from the staging area 30 minutes before the party started. The bartender assumed the server grabbed it for setup. The server assumed the bartender moved it. No one followed up. Marcus thought of Nia pointing at the serving tray. The empty space. The glass that was not the same glass. Security footage, he asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. The camera covering the staging room went offline. For 11 minutes. The words landed like a door closing at the end of an empty hallway. Accident? Marcus asked. Daniel considered it for a moment. Maybe, he said. Neither of them believed it. They found Nia at the far end of the corridor, standing at a wide window overlooking the Atlanta skyline. The city stretched beneath her in layers of amber and white light, enormous and indifferent. She turned when she heard them approach, and something in her expression told Marcus she had been waiting, and that she had more to say. I remembered something else, she said. Tell me. The nervous man. He kept saying it was a bad idea. He said someone might find out. She twisted the bracelet slowly. He didn't sound angry. He sounded scared. Like he already knew it was going to fall apart. Marcus and Daniel exchanged a look. That detail mattered. This was not 2 people equally committed to a plan. One person was driving. One person was being carried along, reluctant, afraid, already regretting it. That distinction could matter later. Then Nia straightened slightly and pointed through the corridor window toward the far side of the ballroom. Here, she said quietly. A woman in catering uniform moved through the crowd, balancing an empty silver tray, weaving between guests without making eye contact. Unremarkable. Forgettable. The kind of person a room full of important people never looks at directly. She was standing outside the staging room, Nia said, when I heard the voices. Marcus was already moving. They lost her in the corridor. She had pushed through a service door and into the stairwell before they reached her. One floor down, then another, until the footsteps faded and they stood in the lower banquet level surrounded by staff who were all the wrong person. Daniel found a staffing clipboard on a supply cart near the wall. He scanned every name assigned to that ballroom section for tonight. No name matched her description. She's not listed, he said quietly. Then she has no reason to be here, Marcus replied. The room felt colder than the air conditioning explained. If she had entered under false credentials, then her presence had never been accidental. She knew exactly where to be and exactly when. Daniel continued through the file. He stopped at a name that had been checked in at the start of the shift but had never logged a single activity since. No breaks. No supply runs. No station check-ins. A name on the list. Nothing else. Angela Pierce. Nia looked at Daniel's phone the moment the photograph appeared. That's her, she said, without hesitation. Daniel immediately pulled her full employee file from hotel security. Angela Pierce had worked 3 events at the hotel in the past 6 weeks. Nothing before that. No history. No prior references beyond the current engagement. And at the bottom of her application, in the emergency contact field, was a name Marcus recognized without needing to read it twice. Victoria Ayes. Same home address. Marcus stared at the screen. Daniel said nothing. From somewhere above them, the muffled sounds of the celebration drifted down through the ceiling. Laughter. Applause. A room that had no idea what was unfolding beneath it. How long has Victoria had family working here? Marcus asked. She never mentioned it, Daniel said. Silence. Daniel scrolled further. He found the referral section. The sponsorship field, where someone in a position of trust had personally vouched for Angela Pierce's employment. The name was Victoria Hayes. Marcus was quiet for a long time after that. He had spent 20 years learning to separate suspicion from evidence. He had built Ellington dynamics on discipline, on the principle that what you felt about a person was not the same thing as what you could prove. He was not willing to destroy 2 years of something real based on a name on a form and a knot in his chest. But the pattern was no longer easy to ignore. He looked at Nia. She was watching both of them carefully, reading the silence the way children read what adults refuse to say out loud. Find Angela, Marcus said. Quietly. Don't alarm anyone upstairs. Before Daniel could make a single call, his phone lit up with a message from hotel security. Angela Pierce had left the building 40 minutes ago, exit log confirmed. She had clocked out and not returned. Then a second message arrived. An image from the parking garage camera. Enhanced, but still grainy. Angela Pierce beside a black sedan at the far end of the lower level. And next to her, partially shadowed beneath the concrete ceiling, was a man in a dark blue tie. Nia noticed it before either adult said a word. That's the same tie, she said. From the other picture. Daniel pulled it up immediately. The earlier security image that had briefly appeared to show Daniel himself in the hallway outside the staging room. The man in that image had been wearing a dark blue tie. Not Daniel, who was wearing silver that evening. Not a coincidence. The same person. Both images. The same tie. Security ran the badge enhancement. The result came back within minutes. Marcus read the name. He read it a second time. Dr. Ethan Mercer. He's physician. 3 years of quarterly checkups, blood panels, and structured wellness plans. The man who had designed the daily supplement routine Marcus had never once questioned, because there had been no reason to. Until now. He stood in the quiet corridor and understood, for the first time that evening, that what had happened tonight had not begun tonight. It had been moving through the background of his life for months, in the spaces he had never thought to examine. 20 minutes later, the hotel security supervisor found them in the service corridor with a tablet and an expression that had moved past professional concern into something closer to genuine unease. The camera that went offline, he said carefully. It wasn't completely dark. Whoever shut down the live feed didn't know the internal backup was recording independently. We recovered most of the 11-minute window. The room went very quiet. Marcus took the tablet. He pressed play. The staging room filled the screen. Timestamp, 32 minutes before the party began. The door opened. Victoria Hayes stepped inside. She moved with the same ease Marcus had watched her carry through every room for 2 years. Unhurried. Composed. She crossed toward the preparation counter where the champagne glasses were arranged in neat rows. She stopped. She looked toward the door. Then she waited. A second figure entered. Angela Pierce. The familiarity between them was immediate and unmistakable. This was not a first meeting. Angela produced a small envelope and handed it across. Victoria took it, opened it briefly, placed it in her purse. Then Angela pointed toward the champagne setup along the far wall. Victoria shook her head. Angela pointed again. More insistently. Victoria crossed her arms. She shook her head a second time, and her posture shifted into something harder. She was not agreeing. She was not cooperating. She looked like someone being asked to cross a line she had already firmly decided not to cross. Then she turned and walked toward the door. Before she left, she removed a key card from her purse and placed it on the counter. Angela picked it up the moment Victoria was gone. Marcus backed the footage up and watched the exchange again. Then a third time. She gave her access, he said slowly. But not permission. Daniel nodded. She knew Angela. But she didn't go along with whatever was planned in that room. Then what was she doing here? No one had an answer yet. The recording continued. Angela alone now. She moved toward the edge of the frame, into the camera blind spot, and disappeared from view for 30 seconds. When she reappeared, she was holding a single champagne glass. She looked toward the hallway. Then she left quickly, the glass held carefully in both hands. The missing glass. The one Nia had recognized from 20 feet across a crowded ballroom. Marcus handed the tablet back. His voice was steady. What happened to that glass? We don't know yet, the supervisor admitted. Then his radio crackled. He listened. Then he looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Ellington. A brief pause. Angela Pierce is back in the building. She came back on her own. And she's asking to speak with you. The second-floor conference room was small and quiet. Glass walls looked out over Atlanta, the city wide and indifferent beneath a clear sky. Everything from the past 2 hours felt very far away, and also very present. Angela Pierce sat alone at the far end of the table. She stood the moment Marcus pushed open the door. She did not look like someone who had been caught. She did not look defiant, or calculating, or rehearsed. She looked like someone who had been carrying something too heavy for too long, and had finally decided to set it down regardless of what happened next. Thank you for coming, she said. Marcus did not sit. Daniel stayed near the door. Nia took a chair by the window, quiet and still, the silver bracelet resting lightly against her wrist. Start talking, Marcus said. Angela placed an envelope on the table. The same one. The one from the footage. Marcus opened it. Inside was a legal document. His name at the top. Victoria's beside it. A prenuptial agreement, marked as the final version. But the language was wrong. Not wrong in the way of a minor error. Wrong in the way of intent. Large sections of his estate had been restructured under transfer conditions he had never discussed with anyone. Clauses that his legal team had never reviewed, never seen, never approved. Daniel leaned over and read in silence for a moment. Then he straightened. These changes were never submitted to council, he said quietly. No, Angela confirmed. They were never meant to be reviewed. They were meant to be signed in a moment of distraction, or trust, or simple inattention. Marcus looked up. How do you know this? Angela exhaled slowly. Because Victoria asked me to deliver the original documents to Dr. Mercer 6 weeks ago. I'm her cousin. She trusted me. She got me things to carry without expecting questions. She paused. I didn't understand what I was carrying then. But I started to notice things. I made a copy before I delivered the envelope. I kept it. Silence settled over the room. Dr. Mercer, Marcus said, mostly to himself. He wasn't trying to harm you quickly, Angela said. The supplements he recommended were not dangerous on their own. But combined with specific additional compounds, introduced gradually, they could produce symptoms that resembled serious cognitive decline. Fatigue. Concentration problems. Memory inconsistencies. The kind of pattern, documented over several months by a physician, that could be used to argue someone was no longer capable of managing their own affairs. Marcus felt something cold settle in the center of his chest. He thought about the past 8 months. The tiredness that came despite full nights of sleep. The strange thickness his thoughts moved through some afternoons. The moments in meetings when his focus slipped and he had told himself it was stress. He had told himself it was stress. The goal, Angela continued, was to build a documented medical record of declining cognitive function. Enough to file a legal petition that Marcus Ellington was no longer fit to lead Ellington Dynamics. And with the modified prenuptial agreement already signed, the estate provisions would activate automatically. The company. The assets. The foundation. All of it. Daniel sat down the document. He said nothing for a moment. Then, quietly, they were going to have him declared unfit. Angela nodded. Her voice dropped. I found out the full scope 3 weeks before tonight. I should have come forward then. She looked at the table. I was afraid. I didn't know who else was involved. I didn't know who would believe me. Victoria is trusted. She is charming. I thought I would be the one who looked unstable. What changed tonight? Marcus asked. Angela looked toward the window. Then her gaze moved to Nia. I heard her, she said simply. I was in the corridor outside this floor when a little girl walked up to one of the most powerful men in this building, at his own engagement party, surrounded by hundreds of people who weren't paying attention, and told him the truth. Without calculating whether it was safe. Without asking what she would get in return. Without knowing if he would believe her. Her voice was quieter now. I have been sitting on the truth for 3 weeks, afraid of what it would cost me to say it. She was 8 years old. She didn't hesitate for a second. That gave me more courage than anything else could have. Nia looked down at her bracelet. Nobody spoke. Marcus closed the document slowly. He looked at Angela across the table. Then at Daniel. Then at the small girl by the window, watching the city lights below with the same calm steadiness she had carried all evening. Nia, he said softly. She looked at him. You knew none of this when you warned me. She shook her head. I just knew what I heard. That was enough, he said. Marcus walked back into the ballroom. The chandeliers were still glowing. The roses were still white. The quartet was still playing. But the room felt different now. Like a painting you return to after learning what the painter was thinking when he made it. Conversation softened as guests noticed his entrance. A wave of awareness moved through the crowd, the way a room adjusts when the person it has been waiting for finally reappears. Victoria stood near the center of the room. Her smile shifted slightly as she saw his expression. Marcus stepped to the stage. He took the microphone. The music faded. The room went quiet. He looked out across hundreds of faces. He did not rush. He did not perform. He stood there for a moment, thinking about what he had been an hour away from drinking, from signing, from becoming. Then he spoke. Tonight, he said, I was reminded that truth doesn't arrive on a schedule. It doesn't wait for the right moment, or the right setting, or the right person to carry it. It paused. Sometimes truth arrives from someone you would never expect. Someone quiet. Someone easy to overlook. Someone who simply decided that staying silent wasn't an option. His eyes found Nia near the back of the room. Standing beside Daniel, the silver bracelet on her wrist, those steady brown eyes watching him without any need for recognition. I owe a debt tonight I don't know how to repay, he continued. And I want to be clear about that. He looked at Victoria. Her smile was gone. In its place was the careful stillness of someone measuring how much had been discovered. This engagement is over, Marcus said. His voice was not raised. It was not cruel. It was simply the voice of a man who had made a decision and was saying it plainly. Several serious matters have come to light tonight that require full investigation. I won't address them further in this room. But I will say one more thing. He looked across the crowd. The most important person here tonight was not the man at the microphone. He stepped back. He set the microphone down. Smoke moved through the ballroom in waves. Whispers rose. Cameras lowered. Staff paused mid-motion. One by one, every head in the room turned toward the back corner, where a child in a blue dress stood holding a silver bracelet, looking as though she would very much prefer not to be the center of anything. Much later, when the guests had gone and the hotel staff had begun the quiet work of dismantling the evening, Marcus found Nia standing at the wide lobby window that looked out over downtown Atlanta. The city was still bright. Still moving. Carrying on the way cities do, without needing to know what had happened inside this building tonight. Cars moved through the streets below, their headlights drawing quiet arcs across the pavement. You should be tired, Marcus said, walking up beside her. I am, she said. But she did not turn from the window. He stood beside her, both of them looking at the lights, sharing the kind of silence that only settles after something significant has finished. You saved my life tonight, he said. Not the way that sounds in movies. But in the way that counts when you're actually living it. Nia considered that. I just said what I heard. Most people who hear something like that find a reason to stay quiet, Marcus replied. They think about the cost. They decide it isn't their problem. He looked down at her. You didn't do any of that. She shrugged one shoulder. My grandma says if you know the truth and don't say it, the truth doesn't go anywhere. It just stays inside you and gets heavy. She says that's how people lose themselves. A little bit at a time. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Your grandmother is right, he said. Nia looked up at him. Are you going to be okay? The question was so simple. No strategy behind it. No calculation. Used the child asking a man she barely knew whether he was going to be okay. I think so, he said. It's going to be complicated for a while. There will be lawyers and investigations and conversations I don't want to have. Exhaled. But I'll be okay. She nodded, satisfied with that. They stood together a little longer. The city moved below them. One man who had built an empire out of strategy and control, and one little girl who had walked into a room full of powerful people carrying nothing but the truth. I want to make sure your grandmother knows what you did tonight, Marcus said. Nia looked slightly alarmed. She's going to make me eat more vegetables. She always says doing the right thing means your body needs extra fuel. Marcus laughed. A real one. Un guardet. The first one all evening. He crouched down so their eyes were level again, the way they had been in the ballroom when this night began. Whatever you need, he said seriously. School. Everything after school. Whatever you decide you want to do with your life, you come find me. I'll write. Nia studied him for a moment, deciding whether the offer was real. Okay, she said. And that was all. The city lights continued below. The hotel settled into its late-night quiet. Marcus stood and thought about the plan that had nearly worked. Built over months. Involving a doctor he had trusted with his body, a woman he had trusted with his future, and a document carefully designed to erase everything he had spent his life building. All of it had come apart because an 8-year-old girl had simply decided to say something. Power did not protect him tonight. Beal did not protect him. His 2 decades of reading rooms and people, his security team, his attorneys, none of it caught. What she caught? A child with a silver bracelet protected him. Because she listened when no one else was paying attention. Because she spoke when speaking felt impossible. Because she carried the truth across a room full of crystal chandeliers and powerful strangers who had never once thought to look her way. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with being powerful. Not the loneliness of an empty room. The loneliness of a room full of people who are there because of what you represent. Marcus had lived in that room for 20 years. He had learned to hold his position at the center of it without being consumed by it. He had built walls that were invisible and effective. And the child had seen past every one of them in under 30 seconds. Not because she was exceptional in the ways that earn applause. Not because she was loud or calculated or clever with her words. But because she had no walls of her own to protect. She had no position to defend. She had nothing to lose except the truth she was carrying, and she had decided that setting it down was not something she was willing to do. He kept thinking about what it had cost her to walk across that ballroom. An 8-year-old girl moving through a crowd of strangers in their formal wear and jewelry, toward a man she did not know well, to say something that could easily have been dismissed. She did it anyway. Not because someone told her to. Because it was the right thing. And that was enough. Marcus made a note to himself. Not a mental note. He took out his phone and wrote it down, because some things are too important to trust to memory. There was a child he owed something to. Not as charity. Not as a transaction. As recognition. As a genuine reckoning with the fact that she had changed the course of his life with 4 words and the courage to say them out loud. He put the phone in his pocket. The city below was exactly what it had been an hour ago, moving, steady, indifferent. A city does not pause for one man's crisis. It does not hold its breath for revelations or betrayals or the quiet unraveling of carefully constructed plans. It continues. And so would Marcus. Not the same version of himself that had walked into that ballroom. That version had been too certain. Though comfortable with the idea that trust, once given, did not need to be questioned. It would carry tonight differently. Not with suspicion. Not with the closed-off armor of someone who had been hurt and decided the safest response was to trust no one. But with attention. With the willingness to hear the voices that others talked over. With the understanding that truth sometimes arrives from the places no one thinks to look, carried by people no one expects to find it in, carried by a child in a blue dress. A silver bracelet. Nothing to gain. No reason to stay silent except the comfort of it, and she had decided that comfort was not worth more than the truth. Marcus walked through the hotel lobby toward the exit. The chandeliers had been dimmed. The roses would be taken down in the morning. The marble floors reflected only the overnight lights. He pushed through the door into the Atlanta night. The air was warm. The city hummed around him, low and constant, the sound of something that never fully sleeps. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. He looked up at the building, at the floor where the ballroom sat, where hours earlier he had stood at the center of a celebration built around a plan he had never been meant to discover. Then he looked forward. Down the street. At the city. At what came next. One evening. One morning. One voice that the world had every reason to overlook. It was still here because she spoke. So many truths do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with evidence attached, or with the kind of authority that makes a room full of powerful people stop and listen. They arrive quietly. In the middle of something else. Through a voice that no one has decided to trust yet. That is what made this one different. Marcus Ellington had been trained, by 20 years of high-stakes decisions, to distrust things that arrived without documentation. He had seen too many people bring him incomplete information, dressed up in urgency, asking him to act before he had time to think. He had learned to slow down. To ask for proof. To wait. But there was no proof tonight. When it mattered. There was only a child, and the steady way her eyes did not move from the glass in his hand, and the weight in her voice that no 8-year-old should have had reason to carry. He had believed her. Not because she had shown him anything. Because the way she said it was not the way a child performed a warning. It was the way a child delivered one. That difference was everything. Angela Pierce had been afraid for 3 weeks. She had known the shape of the plan. She had watched the pieces move into position. She had understood, from the moment she read the full document, what the end of the story was meant to look like. And she had said nothing. Not because she was cruel. Not because she wanted Marcus to be harmed. But because the calculation in her mind kept arriving at the same conclusion, that saying something would cost more than staying silent. That Victoria was trusted. That she herself would not be believed. That stepping forward would be the same as stepping into traffic. She had made the same calculation every morning for 3 weeks. Every morning it came out the same way. Then she heard Nia. And the calculation changed. Because Nia had nothing. No credentials. No documentation. No protection if Marcus had laughed her off or dismissed her. She was 8 years old in a blue dress in a ballroom full of strangers who were all too busy celebrating to notice her. And she had done it anyway. Angela had stood in that corridor and felt something shift inside her chest. If a child could do it with nothing, then fear was no longer a sufficient reason to stay silent. That was the moment the evening turned. Not when security recovered the footage. Not when the documents were revealed. Not when Marcus stepped to the microphone. It turned in a corridor, when a woman who had been afraid for 3 weeks heard a child be brave, and decided that she could be too. Marcus thought about that later. Standing on the sidewalk outside the hotel, the city moving around him. He thought about how many people had been in that building tonight who knew more than they said. He thought about all the times in his own life when he had known something was wrong and had found reasons to wait, to observe, to gather more information, to give it more time. He thought about how often those reasons had been real, and how often they had simply been comfortable. The plan had almost worked because it relied on a universal truth about the way powerful people moved through the world. They trusted the people closest to them without examining that trust too carefully. They assumed that loyalty, once demonstrated, did not need to be verified again. They built walls everywhere except in the one direction they believed was already safe. That was the vulnerability. Not the gap in security. Not a flaw in the system. A flaw in the certainty that love and proximity were the same thing as transparency. It would not make that mistake again. Not the same mistake. Not in the same way. It was not going to become a closed person. It was not going to let this turn him into someone who examined everything with suspicion, who treated closeness as risk, who withdrew behind professionalism and called it wisdom. That would be a different kind of loss. Slower. Quieter. But just as real. What he was going to do was pay attention differently. It was going to listen to the voices that arrived without credentials. It was going to slow down in the moments when certainty felt most comfortable. It was going to remember that the most dangerous assumptions were the ones that felt like facts. And he was going to remember a child who had walked across a ballroom and said 4 words that changed the shape of his life. He was still there. Still himself. Still in possession of the future he had built. Because an 8-year-old girl had decided the truth was worth more than her comfort. He owed her something for that. Something real. Not a check. Not a scholarship announcement that made him look generous from across a room. Something that acknowledged what she had actually done, which was not just warn him but remind him that courage did not require any of the things he had spent his life accumulating. It just required a decision. The right decision. Más de 11. Out loud. He looked up at the Atlanta sky. It was clear and quiet and vast, the way skies look in the middle of the night when the city hum drops just low enough to let you remember how large everything is. He had a lot of work ahead of him. The lawyers. The investigation. The conversations he was not looking forward to. The public part of all of it, which would be unavoidable and unpleasant. He found, standing there on the sidewalk, that none of it felt as heavy as it should have. Because the alternative had been worse. The alternative had been a future that someone else had written for him without his knowledge. He was still here. Still himself. Still standing. One evening. One morning. One voice that belonged to a child in a blue dress with a silver bracelet and nothing to gain except the knowledge that she had done the right thing. He turned and walked down the street. The city moved around him, steady and indifferent and alive, the way cities are long after the important moments inside them have ended. He walked. And he carried tonight with him. Not as a wound. As a lesson. The most important kind. There is a version of this story where Nia says nothing. Where she gets her lemonade, hears two voices through the wall, watches someone set a different glass on a tray, and decides it is not her business. She is 8 years old. She has no reason to involve herself in the affairs of a man she barely knows. She does not work here. She is not responsible for what happens in rooms she was not supposed to enter. The rational thing to do is walk away. That version of the story exists. Nia simply chose not to live in it. She made a decision, in the space of a few seconds, that the right thing outweighed the comfortable thing, and she acted on it before she could talk herself out of it. That is the whole of it. That is the thing no one in that ballroom, including Marcus Ellington himself, would have expected from an 8-year-old guest standing near the lemonade station in a blue dress and silver ribbons. But expectations are built on what people have done before. Not on what they are capable of doing when it matters. Nia was capable of this. She always had been. Her grandmother had made sure of it, one conversation at a time, over years of ordinary evenings that turned out not to be ordinary at all. That was the real beginning of the story. Not the engagement party. Not the ballroom. Not the champagne glass or the documents or the plan that had been months in the making. The real beginning was in a kitchen across the city, at some point in the past several years, when a grandmother told a child that the truth had weight, and that the weight got heavier the longer you refused to carry it, and that the only way to stay light was to say what you knew when saying it was the right thing to do. That lesson had traveled a long way tonight. Further than the woman who gave it will probably ever know. Marcus looked at his phone one last time before he got into the car. Daniel had sent an update. The legal team was assembling. Security had secured the glass and logged the chain of evidence. Dr. Mercer had been contacted by investigators. The preliminary lab results were being processed. Everything was moving. Slowly, and in the right direction. Marcus typed a reply to Daniel. 3 words. Make sure Nia's grandmother receives a call tonight. He put the phone away. He settled back in the seat as the car moved through the Atlanta streets, the city lights sliding past the windows, orange and white and unhurried. He thought about what kind of man walked out of a night like this. He thought about what he wanted the answer to be. He thought about an 8-year-old girl standing at a lobby window, looking at a city she had not yet had time to know, with the quiet certainty of someone who had already learned the most important thing any person can learn. That the truth is not something you receive. It is something you choose to carry. And tonight, she had carried it all the way to him.